I was a bit challenged. So it's always a little bit of a work, but thank you for all showing up. On behalf of the Montana World Affairs Council, I want to introduce Executive Director in the back, Chris Easlip. This is a joint collaboration that's been going on now for quite a few years between the Central Southwest Asia Program and the Montana World Affairs Council. So we all welcome you and want to thank you for taking time to come. I had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing the gentleman that will be speaking from the National Guard this morning. They are an amazing group by character and by work that they do. So I know you will find probably insights and understandings of what they do that will be very surprising to you. But just as a reminder, this is your tax dollars at work in the most efficient way that you can imagine. So I just want to say a few brief words and welcome and thank all of them for their service. I also want to introduce a friend of mine, and speaking of service, a gentleman that is without peer in terms of his background and what he's done for this country. So I'm going to embarrass him by reading a little bit of his bio here. Brigadier General Dale Stovall, a decorated combat veteran, Brigadier General Air Force retired. Dale Stovall graduated from U.S. Air Force Academy and received an MBA from Auburn University. He later served as a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. General Stovall flew helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. His combat decorations for helicopter rescues in North Vietnam and Laos include Air Force Cross, 2 Silver Stars, our nation's second and third highest awards for valor. Before retiring, he was Deputy Commanding General of Joint Force Operations Command at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the nation's counter-terrorist command. This unit includes SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, the Rangers, and the Army and Air Force Special Ops Aviation units, which include Air Force One's Special Operation Wing, which General Stovall previously commanded. After retiring from the Air Force in 1993, General Stovall was a pilot for Federal Express for 13 years, and then served as an Air Force Academy admissions officer. So without further ado, first, I want to say with complete gratitude, thank you for your years of service and friendship. And Missoula is fortunate to have you here. So Dale, yeah, please.
Hey, first of all, you know, we've got our Army Guard guys here. You know, these are our true citizen soldiers. Now, the 3 of them are full-time Guard members, because like they told me, somebody has to turn on and turn off the lights, but they do a lot more than that, and you're going to hear from them. 2 of them have 4 deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq during the war. And they're over there for a year. So they're gone from their families and their jobs, because almost all of the Guard folks work for a living. And the Guard is something that they believe in. A lot of them had served in the military before in the Guard, but they're out there right now recruiting Guard members. If you can, what was it? You get $500 if you get a recruit. Right now, if you're a former military person and you get somebody to sign up to the National Guard, you can get a check for $500 because they're trying to recruit young men and women to be part of our citizen soldiers. This is a far cry from what we see over in Israel, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I'm going to ask you guys to stand up because you're going to be up here. Major Chris Corey. He'll have to explain to you what his job was, but he has a background both in the Marines and now in the Guard. Captain James Infager. He'll talk about they need to talk a little bit about their deployments before they get on their other horses. And Command Major Sergeant William Frank. You know, I was in the 1st Special Ops Wing, and the scariest thing I had to go is talk to the Chiefs Council, because they don't cut you any slack. And so the senior guys are critical to the functioning of our U.S. military. I'm going to talk, I was the Deputy Commanding General of the Joint Special Ops Command at Fort Bragg. As they told you, we had our Tier 1 forces are SEAL Team 6, Delta, the Air Force combat controllers and pararescue guys. They're embedded with them there, as well as other units. We also have Tier 2 forces. We have a Marine component now that we didn't have before when I was there. We have the Air Force and Army Special Ops Aviation and some other units they call Tier 2. Let me just give you an example of why the members of our Tier 1 folks are national assets. You have about 3,000 guys that will volunteer to go into Delta. It's really detachment Delta, but that was a cover. Anyway, Delta. They'll boil that down to 120, bring them in for psych evaluations, or down to 1,200, bring them in for psych evaluations, interviews, and get down to 120. They put them in the training, the selection course. At the end of that 9 weeks, there'll be about a dozen left. And then they put them in the green team to train up with Delta. And at the end of the year, there'll be about 6 left. They're not kids, they're in their 30s. SEAL's a little different in their selection, but they go through the BUDS course, which is a selection course of its own. The Air Force combat controllers and pararescue guys are volunteers that come in, and they go through a similar selection program. But the Air Force PJs, for example, their medical rucksack is 40 pounds. The rest of their loadout that they have for their guns, ammunition, radios, and water, and all of that is another 40 pounds. So the first day before they can even enter the selection course, they got to take an 80-pound rucksack, hike 40 miles in 24 hours. That weeds them out. So these men, and there are some women in the Special Ops Tier 1 forces are national assets. The selection course, it's different than anything else in any of the military. And they're there to help us. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about hostage rescue. We know we've got a number of Americans that are hostages. And there's a lot of talk about us going in and getting them out. I do not think that's possible. When Delta or SEAL Team 6 goes into a situation, and then a lot of the times they're going on a hit to capture somebody, they're not a kill force, they're a capture force. And they want to take a senior Al-Qaeda or a senior ISIS guy captive and get information from them. In this case, you have intelligence of exactly where they are, 1. 2, you have the capability to rehearse for this. In some cases, build up buildings and other things so that you can actually walk in, see, and you know where they are. And 3, you use the element of surprise. Almost all of the missions are conducted at night, and they go in with helicopters, sometimes on foot. But you can imagine landing a helicopter in the city. You can't sneaking up on them. How do you take down a tunnel? Probably the people that are holding our hostages there have already decided that they will give their life, they will kill the hostages and give up their life. They will not let us capture those hostages. So I think we're going to have to get those in a different manner because we're not going to be able to do it militarily. Another thing the Israelis have an issue with is their reservists, that they've called up 300,000 of them. They serve 2 years in the military, and then they go into the reserves, and they have limited training. So as a force that you're going to put into the city, it's probably not going to happen. They do not have the training to do that. So the IDF forces are going to be the forces that are going to have to do this. So this is going to be a real challenge. We know from Fallujah, when we sent our Marines into Fallujah to take that city down, we took a lot of casualties. Casualties are very, very difficult. Who's our first speaker here? Pop up.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Corey, and first I'd like to say thank you, General Stovall, Bob Seidenschwartz, and to the University of Montana for the opportunity to tell you what your National Guard is doing on your behalf in regards to security and stability in the 21st century. So Montana partners with 4 countries, 2 in Central Asia, that's the Kyrgyz Republic in Turkmenistan, and 2 in South Asia, which are Sri Lanka and the Maldives. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But first, I'd like to talk about a big picture perspective, which is security and stability in the 21st century. And our world is already in a new era of competition. Things have changed drastically. Advanced technologies change the way we look at things. Society is changing. While this new world is replete with opportunities, it's also rife with exceeding challenges and dangers with dire consequences. You can see some of the statistics up here with a 13% increase in natural disasters over the last 10 years. In some cases, that could be even more depending on how you count the statistics. Political violence is increasing significantly, and that's been observed over the last few years in our world, most recently with Israel. And this is all happening while global food insecurity is increasing drastically with a 50% increase in the last year alone. Layered on top of that is going to be a massive increase in energy demand, which is going to increase competition and instability throughout the world. So while these challenges present themselves in the face of a world where the effects of artificial intelligence, resource competition, and mass immigration are changing fundamental geopolitical underpinnings. Moreover, this is all happening in a world that is more interconnected than ever, making local and regional conflicts global in nature. So with this in mind, we at the State Partnership Program, or the SPP, focus on 2 principal concepts when we do our work, and that's security and stability, without which civilization cannot sustain itself, much less flourish. And security exists on a continuum that's always in flux. And destabilizing factors range from climate change to large-scale combat operations and opportunists who seek to take advantage of human suffering and power vacuums throughout the world. So with this in mind, we may be compelled by looking at this slide to think that we're in for a big fight, and that we paint our enemies as 10-foot giants and these deteriorating conditions, whether they be environmental or otherwise, or insurmountable quagmires, when in fact this really isn't always the case, because there's a lot of good work and stability factors that are ongoing right now, ranging from defense agreements and security cooperation to institutional resiliency initiatives and much more to establish and foster a condition of stability. The State Partnership Program plays an integral role in this massive enterprise. The SPP traditionally works within the security spheres. So we partner with border security, with Ministry of Emergency Services, and also ministries of defense across the world. However, the SPP also uniquely works within the civilian to military spheres and the civilian to civilian spheres. And I'll get into why that's so unique here in a little bit and the different opportunities that brings up for us. But we do that to address the emerging threats and opportunities that our nation and the global community faces. So how do we do this? How does the State Partnership Program conduct its business? Well, traditionally, the SPP focuses on the areas highlighted in yellow up on the screen, which is working through ministries of defense, bolstering security through the different security apparatuses in our partner nations, and certainly, and more pressingly recently, through the disaster management services in our partnered countries, all the while underscoring some of our values, which are human rights and the respect for sovereignty. We accomplish this through conducting multiple exchanges and training venues with our partners here in the United States and abroad. Our events are meticulously planned. They're tailor-made in coordination with our partner nations. And most importantly, we are aligned to our combatant commander objectives and to the ambassadors' initiatives. It's really important at this point to talk about how do we do this legally? How do we spend taxpayers' dollars? So we're a program that's managed by the National Guard Bureau. So administratively, think pay and personnel. But when we conduct our activities, we are doing so expressly under a combatant command's authority. So that's a 4-star commander who is responsible for large geographic areas across the world. I'm also nested with Department of State. And so we are working for that ambassador and the defense attaché officer overseas when we're doing our activities. And so you can see there's alignment within U.S. strategy abroad when we're conducting our activities. We don't just go out and do activities to do activities. We're aligned, lock in step with Department of State and the DoD. Now, there's a way that Congress lets me do this too, and this is through Title 10 Code, subsection 341. And all that means is that I'm allowed legally to initiate partnerships with foreign governments and then conduct activities within those relationships based on security. Now, unique to the SPP is that I can actually pair with any authority out there under Title 10. So that means I can broaden my scope of engagement to include anything with it that the DoD can do. That can be special operations authorities, that could be disaster management authorities, and there's a couple hundred out there that we can pick and choose from. And that makes the state partnership program exceedingly unique because no other DoD program can actually do that. But this brings us to why we're actually very unique. We're unique because we can do tailor-made engagements based on the needs and desires of our partners. And so we're overseas consistently working with ministers of defense and recently with ministers of energy, agriculture, and even in some cases, their heads of state. And then we hear what they have to say. And we take that down to the tactical level where we're at all the time with a farmer in a field or a border security guy on the border with China or Iran, somewhere like that. And so we're actually able to have a very unique picture of what's going on overseas and then tailor make exchanges based on what our partner nation is signaling to us and overlay that with what the combatant commander wants to achieve in that specific area to put tailor-made programs that meets the intent of both our partner nation and our DoD and Department of State overseers. But we're not unique. There's actually state partnership programs across all the 50 states and our territories. So 54 programs in total. Now, we do hit a capacity. Right now, we're at 100 countries, partnered countries right now, and we will max out at 130 roughly in 2030. And so what this slide is really telling us is that there's a network of states in this business of security cooperation that not just military assets can connect through, but most importantly, what state governments, what private industry and other interested parties can connect through to conduct long-term engagements. So the state partnership, your state partnership program in Central Asia. Where are we? Well, on the left side of your screen, you'll see Turkmenistan in blue, and on the right side, you'll see the Kyrgyz Republic. And again, we have 4 partner nations, and Turkmenistan, again, on the right side of your screen, is strategically located. It borders Iran and Afghanistan to the south, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan to the north, and critically, the Caspian Sea to the west. Major oil and gas pipelines run through Turkmenistan, ending in terminals in Iran, Russia, and China. While most of its European market is coordinated through Iran, there is a Trans-Caspian pipeline currently in development, which is a major strategic pipeline leading to Baku, Azerbaijan, which accesses Eastern European, therefore Western European oil and energy markets. Turkmenistan is majority Sunni, however, only nominally so. The government is conscious about remaining strictly secular. This is really a result of Soviet legacy systems, and then also a very keen eye and consciousness towards how destabilizing Islamic extremism has been in the region. Most notably is their positive neutrality, which is recognized by the United Nations. Positive neutrality basically states that Turkmenistan won't be beholden to any one power. However, they can go into agreements internationally, specifically trade agreements, while still maintaining a neutrality with all partners. This gives them good standoff from really the big elephants in the room, Russia, China, and the United States. We're meeting with one of their ministers, and he said, listen, when the elephants dance, we don't want to be in the room, meaning that they'll get crushed if they lean too close to one party. And they do this very well because their debt to GDP is almost at zero. So it gives them a lot of financial leverage to maintain a position economically where they want to be in. Economically, Turkmenistan staple exports are cotton first and foremost, and then certainly with the oil and gas, primarily LNG. And the vast majority of the exports go to Russia and China, with 70% of their exports going to China. But they're also a regional agricultural producer, which is important for them, especially as they look at one of their main challenges, which you can see up there, which is water scarcity. Turkmenistan's one of 12 nations that has been identified by the UN as being critically positioned for destabilizing effects due to water insecurity. which has a massive impact on their security situation, especially considering where they're located. In fact, the Taliban are currently constructing a dam on the Afghan side of the border on the Amu Darya, which is going to stress an already precarious water situation in Turkmenistan. Kyrgyzstan, on the other side, is nested in some of the highest mountain ranges in the world, in particular the Tian Shan mountain range. Most notably, Kyrgyzstan sits on the border of Xinjiang province, which is right here. This is the border with the Kyrgyz Republic in China. And right here in the Taklamakan Desert in Xinjiang province is a place called Kashgar. And some of you might have heard of this province in China. It's where the Uyghurs are currently being persecuted. But Kashgar might also sound familiar to some of those, or to some of you who have studied ancient Silk Road patterns and networks. Kashgar is a critical city that projects old ancient Silk Roads up north into around the Taklamakan Desert into Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, and then to the south in Osh, and then projects larger networks into Central Asia, tapping into the economics there. China in recent times is trying to reestablish that through the CKU, which is the Chinese Kyrgyz Uzbek Railway, in order to tap into, in a broader sense, Central Asian markets, but specifically Kazakh oil fields to the north. Some other issues in the Kyrgyz Republic, it's its perennial political instability. A coup to the Kyrgyz is basically like an election to us. I think they've had one full presidential election since their independence in 1991 that hasn't been a coup. And so they're sitting in a very precarious political situation. And what that means for us from a security perspective is that anytime there's a disaster or some sort of conflict, that the government's at risk almost automatically, something that we here in America might take for granted. So that's something that's keenly on the Kyrgyz minds at all time. So where are we at in South Asia? In South Asia, we work primarily with the Maldivians and Sri Lanka. You'll see the Maldives, the atolls there on the left side of your screen, and Sri Lanka on the right side of your screen. Now, these are two critical landmasses coming out of the Straits of Malacca. So the Straits of Malacca come right out of the Philippine Sea, into the Indian Ocean. Now, this is critical because the vast majority of maritime shipping passes through this land and within 12 nautical miles of both of these countries. In today's interconnected world, these shipping lanes cannot be overemphasized for their economic significance. Now, the Maldivians are majority Sunni Islam. Their primary economic driver is tourism, as it's a strikingly beautiful tropical paradise. Now, if you haven't had the chance to go, I'd highly recommend it. But it also benefits from rich fisheries as well, specifically their tuna markets. Its biggest challenge, though, is its political instability within the GPC, or Great Power Competition framework. So just recently, a few weeks ago, their presidential incumbent, President Soleh, was defeated by President Ibrahim Muzay, who is a pro-China candidate, which is a big deal for the United States in this region. So President Soleh was a pro-US, pro-Indian president, and the new president is very clearly pro-China, which is going to complicate the US Maldivian security relationship in the Maldives. So we'll see how this develops over the next few years. With that said, this is where the SPP becomes a real interesting partner, because we're kind of below that threshold of big government, right? We're kind of seen as a state, and we're just a little bit below that radar of what might be seen as big, USG coming in to do activities. And so we just present a nice, unique, low scale access for any of our partners out there. So what is this? And then, Sri Lanka to the right is a fascinating country. So they're majority Sinhalese Buddhists, 75% Sinhala Buddhists, and then the majority of the remainder, about 15% or so, are Tamil Hindus, which are mostly populated in the north, where you see up Jaffna up there, and then the remainder being a mix of Moorish Islamic followers and Christians and other religious sections, mostly to the east and the south of the country. And I'll talk about the major weakness now in Sri Lanka, and it originates from the ethnic and religious strife between these two groups. In the 80s, a multi-generational civil war was initiated between the Sinhalese Buddhists and the Tamil Hindus, colloquially known as the Tamil Tigers. And just recently in the mid-2000s, The Civil War came to a conclusion where the government, they declared victory over the Tamil Tigers, and now they're on a path towards reconciliation. However, this unique situation has made it very complicated for the United States to partner with the Sri Lankans due to a lot of complexities surrounding the Civil War, human rights, and things like that. My program's unique in the sense that we're the first program to work with their army in many decades. And so we've done explosive ordnance disposal operations with them, with humanitarian demining and things like that in Sri Lanka. And so we're very much looking forward to expanding our opportunities and access into Sri Lanka. Economic drivers in Sri Lanka are majority extractive resources. They're world known for their gems, and that's their primary export, other than their agricultural export of Ceylon tea. And they do have a pretty big market in timber industries and exotic timber and things like that. So, but what does this boil down to? So we've talked a lot about kind of theory, but what does my program actually do? So I'll show you a few pictures of just a few examples. So over the last year, we conducted 52 events overseas and here in the United States with our partner nations. At the top and bottom left are Montana medical experts, doctors, medics, etc., working alongside Sri Lankan military and disaster response personnel. What we're doing here is training these Sri Lankans on trauma management. So everything from point of injury to triage to getting them to a Rule 2 trauma facility. On the right side are Kyrgyz physicians working alongside Montana and other DoD physicians working on advanced trauma procedures. So we saw a lot of issues coming out of the Kyrgyz Republic with blast wounds, things like that. And so we're doing some arterial suturing here on an actual patient out in Maryland, actually, on this one. So the top photo on this one are Kyrgyz explosive ordnance disposal technicians alongside Montana Air explosive ordnance disposal technicians. And these guys are really, really special. Our Air Guard guys here, they're all special operations qualified. They've done a lot of demining operations across the world, along as attached to various special operations units doing EOD activity. But this one was interesting because just recently in the Kyrgyz Republic, the Tajiks, there was an incursion along the Kyrgyz border, which resulted in over 100,000 displaced persons and multiple casualties. But the biggest problem was the anti-personnel landmines and unexploded ordnance in the Batken region in the Kyrgyz Republic that was killing, maiming, and wounding a lot of civilian personnel. And so we put this event together to bring Kyrgyz EOD technicians to Montana to work on how do we identify these devices, how do we isolate them, and then render them safe in both urban and rural environments. And on the bottom one, we just conducted this actually a couple of weeks ago, but this was Bozeman firefighters alongside Montana Army and Air firefighters conducting some very serious and technical search and rescue skills and structural high-rise firefighting techniques. And I want to take a moment to pause on this last one because we don't just do events in a vacuum and isolated. What we want to do is reach some sort of intermediate objective. We want to build towards something. So this bottom one is building towards, in the next 2 years, what we call a regional DRE, or disaster response exercise. And so we had the Assistant Secretary of Defense from Sri Lanka here in Montana about a month ago, and she agreed to sign on to allow Montana to serve as the lead element to conduct a regional DRE in the region with the Philippines, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, potentially Japan coming in, which is a big deal in the South Pacific right now and is a loud statement. And so we're building that out right now. And the way we do that is we focus on tactical level proficiencies. So think heavy urban search and rescue, firefighting. Then we also focus on operational level things. So command and control for disaster response. And then that strategic part of how do we look at memorandums of agreement and legal contracts to ensure that when a capacity limit has been hit at a certain level, how do you reach out both internal to your nation and external to your nation to ensure that personnel and equipment can get there in a timely manner. But the last thing I'll say until I get into the last part of my brief here is that this just really represents the tip of the iceberg of what the state partnership program can do. And I would argue that we're really being leveraged about 25% of our true capacity. And I'll talk here quickly about how we can be used to our truly full capacity, and that's through a whole of society lens. So traditionally, the the National Guard Partnership Program works in the orange and the white ovals there, and that's mostly your military to military and your military to civilian engagements focused on how do you build defense capacities and how do you work on building emergency disaster capacities within a partner nation. Just recently, we've had Scott Osterman, our Director of Commerce. We've had Chris Dorrington, our Director of Environmental Quality, and Christy Clark and Ian Foley, our Directors of Agriculture, on engagements with us overseas, talking about disaster response and mitigation from an infrastructure protection standpoint. And these engagements have opened a wide door to increase cooperation on a subnational level, subnational diplomacy level that can really have a strategic and geopolitical impact. And so what does this look like? Our methodology is to bring these senior leaders over and to talk both at the senior leader level with our ministers and heads of state, which we've done in Turkmenistan and the Kyrgyz Republic, and then in turn create opportunities for very small scale tailorable events that provide opportunities for foreign direct investment, for increased layered approach to various security mechanisms. In our discussions, we found with the Turkmen that their top priorities are methane reduction, which is, they're a world super emitter, and we're actually starting a program. We had our first meeting this week with Bridger Photonics, BioSqueeze, Scott Osterman, and the U.S. Embassy and other economic folks on, hey, how do we get U.S. businesses into Turkmenistan to solve this problem? And we're very close to getting to the next step. They're also very much interested in food security. They're interested in, hey, how do we look at our cattle herds? How do we look at drought-resistant crops to ensure that we can feed our population into the future? And then same thing in the Kyrgyz Republic with agriculture. And then they're also interested in, hey, how do we look at forestry from a perspective of environmental sciences, and how do we overlay that with extractive industries to ensure that we can be, doing what we need to do economically going into the future, especially as we look at transitioning to a green future. So where have we been? This is just some photos from Bakhchek Amanbayev, the Kyrgyz ambassador to the United States. We've developed a good relationship with him. They've already started investing in Montana agricultural sectors to bolster Kyrgyz herd variety, which is very interesting. And Montana Department of Agriculture is working on that right now. But we brought them through and we talked everything from agriculture to environment, all the way to energy policy, because there's a lot of similarities between the Kyrgyz Republic and the state of Montana in this regard. And this is a word wall, but what I want to really point out here are some of the statements from the U.S. ambassadors to the Secretary of State based off of the engagements that we did in country. And you can see some of them there. The government of Turkmenistan's full embrace of the state partnership program. They like us because we're that subnational diplomacy level. We're quiet. We believe in discretion when we're doing these things, and the government really appreciates that, and that provides us the opportunity to partner more in depth with Turkmenistan. You can see the Turkmen Minister of Agriculture jumped up in the middle of a meeting and said, "This is exactly what we need," when we're talking about some of the things that we have here in Montana, for example, post-crop generation, dry land farming, drought-resistant wheat, things like that, all with a higher protein yield. And then the U.S. ambassador to the Kyrgyz Republic stating that when we were meeting with the Minister of Ecology in Bishkek, stating that this is a perfect program to bolster and a unique way to get after security cooperation and diplomacy. And so they really liked it because, again, they're working with the people who could actually connect to the experts with like 1 degree of separation, and they love that idea. So what's the way ahead for us? Well, the way ahead for us right now is we have really 3 initiatives that we're working that are close to coming to fruition. In Turkmenistan, looking at methane reduction, we're doing that exchange right now. So Bridger Photonics and BioSqueeze are programs that do methane modeling and then also methane sequestration through some proprietary data. What does that do for us, though, at the end of the day? Why is the DoD interested in that? Well, the way we look at disaster response is not the way our partners look at disaster response. And so what we can do as the SBP is serve as a critical node to ensure we can make connections to people who can do that, and we can steward that to a point where it can kind of take a life of its own. Agricultural exchanges, we're working on those right now from a food security perspective. And then in Kyrgyzstan, we're looking at the forestry projects and connecting with University of Montana Department of Forestry at some point in the near future to look at what connections we can make there from an academic exchange perspective. And all of this, what all of this does is it gives us options. It gives us ways to communicate and connect with people. General Stovall mentioned the Israeli hostages right now. Wouldn't it be nice if there was somebody over there that we could talk to, because certain relationships have been made, and that will open backdoor discussions to solve problems. Not that it will, but it certainly presents unique opportunities to do things like that. And so I'll end with this slide right here. The United States, all of our agencies, DoD especially, tends to look at a disaster at point of impact, and maybe a little bit to the left of point of impact. And so we're always focused on the bad. And we're always focused on how do we build resiliency for a disaster that's going to happen tomorrow. And so where I think the state partnership program can really be leveraged, not just in the security sphere, but is how do we get to what we call left of boom? So before a disaster strikes, and that's through the stabilizing factors, through subnational diplomacy, through developing relationships at the state leadership level, all the way down to the farmer level. Because if you were to imagine like what success looks like, it's a Kyrgyz farmer with a Montana farmer having an argument in a field, and a beer at night, talking about how do we do this better for our people. And that's really what it is. And how do we both benefit from this economically? And that's really where we want to be, because when things happen, which they eventually will, if it's in the Kyrgyz Republic, what a great way for a farmer to call his friend up to say, hey, what's really happening on the ground right now? Can you give me some information? And then that allows us to respond a little bit better than maybe we would have otherwise. So with that, James and Will, have you guys come up, and we'll pause for questions right now and do a quick Q&A session. Bob, if you're good with that. So great.